Dr. Stuart Shanker, thank you so much for joining us here on the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so great to see you.
Very nice to be here. Thank you.
And of course, I'm here as well, Stuart, Richard. So the Richard and Matt show, really interested. We were very fortunate to be sent some information about your work. We'll get you to talk about it. We've had a little introduction telling about the book and various things, but maybe just to get everybody rounded off, where are you? How have you come up to this? And, what motivated you to create this particular material? If you could just fill us in on that sort of background.
Well, I was at Oxford for 10 years, and I was working on self-regulation in the 20th century. And that was an idea that was really created by an American physiologist, Walter Bradford Cannon. And then it developed in all sorts of ways throughout the 20th century. And it was actually one of the inspirations for the early artificial intelligence. So I was working on all that stuff and wrote a couple of books about it, and came to Canada in 1986 and wrote an article about this, what's called a psychophysiological definition of self-regulation, meaning how we handle stress. That's all it meant. And so I got a letter from some editor of Education Canada, and he said, oh, everybody's talking about self-regulation these days. Would you write an article for us? So I said, sure, send me, half a dozen things that you've published on the topic, and then I'll write something. And I read what they sent me, and honestly, I didn't know what the hell these guys were talking about.
Oh, dear.
It was good. I don't mean to criticize it. It's just it had nothing to do with what I'd been trained in or what I'd worked on. We actually did a study ourselves a few years ago and found that there are 447 different definitions of self-regulation.
Wow.
446 of those are variations on self-control.
Right.
But that's not what I was trained in. I was trained in how the body really works as a self-regulating mechanism to deal with stress. And that idea got picked up by Hans Selye. And when they talk about self-regulation, they're talking about how, for example, yesterday I had a very interesting example myself. It's very cold up here. And I went for a walk. And when I got back, I was absolutely floored. I couldn't move. What had happened was, without my knowing it, my body was producing what are called catecholamines to deal with the cold. Cold is a stress. Mm-hmm. And I didn't feel cold. I wasn't aware of being cold. And I spent the rest of the day with a fierce headache and all kinds of side effects. So what I wanted to explain was that there is this big difference between self-regulation and self-control that we can develop. This is the work I was trained in psychiatry under Stanley Greenspan. We can develop methods of reducing a child's stress load. First, we have to figure out when a kid is overstressed. And what we discovered, I'll sum it up in one sentence. What I've discovered over the course of my career is that there is no such thing as a bad kid. There are kids that are terribly overstressed. This is misinterpreted. The kids are then punished, further stressed. And that's a life that was just wasted. And that's a life that can be saved, that can be transformed. And that's what I do. So we work around this country and we work around the world now, trying to get people to see that there really isn't such a thing as a stupid kid, a lazy kid, or a bad kid. They're just kids.
And they're struggling to manage a fixed world. And I think this is, we are huge in trying to educate people to understand that we live in a complex system. It's not a linear world. I mean, there are lots of linear aspects to it, but this complex world. So what is going to be an easy path for one kid is not necessarily going to be an easy path for another kid, but that doesn't mean the kid's wrong. And I love hearing what you're saying. So how do you find the way you access, how do you integrate? I guess this is getting straight to the core of some of the processes you do and the way you work with kids, because I imagine each child would be almost an individual case. That's just a question to ask. Yeah.
Well, we discovered a couple of things early on. The first thing is exactly, Richard, what you just said. No two kids have the same reaction to stress. For some of them, they thrive on it. It's what Selye called eustress. And for some of them, they can't handle it and they start to break down in various ways. So that's the first lesson. What's the stress for one kid's not for another. But the second lesson is the little buggers change on you all the time.
I've got grandkids, and I'm going, wow, I forgot about this. Yeah.
So we have, it's really a 5-step method that we've developed over the years. And the first step, we call it reframing. And what that means is we have to figure out, is this misbehavior that we're seeing, or is it stress behavior? And these come from different parts of the brain. Misbehavior is very much a prefrontal thing. A kid knows it's intentional. The kid knows what he's doing, trying to get away with something. Stress behavior comes from the limbic system. Stress behavior comes from these ancient mechanisms, and they cause the kid to behave in certain ways. So what we want when we work with parents or with teachers is we want to figure out, is this stress behavior? Is this kid overstressed? And if the kid is overstressed, why is the kid overstressed? And then what can we do to start to reduce the kid's stress load? And then the last 2 steps are kind of key. The 4th step is we want the kid to become calm. What we've seen in our own work is a generation of children and youth who don't know what calmness is. And by that, we mean, psychological as well as physical. And then the last step is restoration. And I was going through your podcast. You have a wonderful lineup. All of the guys that I've either worked with or would like to work with. Our concept of restoration comes from Porges. We're really looking there at that neurobiological restorative state where cellular damage is repaired and so on. And how do we get children or teenagers to restore? But the biggest discovery that we made is that we can't do any of this until we work on the self-regulation of the parent or the teacher. What we've seen is everybody's overstressed. And if the adult is overstressed, even if they watch everything they say, even if they are really disciplined in the words they use, what they're feeling leaks. It leaks out. And this is a great point that Pat Ogden makes. So that leakage comes through, affect tone, eyes, gestures. And when a kid is overstressed, that's what they hear. They don't hear the words, they hear what you're feeling. So any chance you have of helping that child to calm down and learn how to calm themselves is non-viable. They're basically not processing what you're saying.
Now, I want to just jump into the middle here. So you said that the experience of calm is something that kids are not familiar with these days, that everybody is stressed. Yep. Now, we've been talking about stress and affect regulation for a long time now. And seemingly things are getting worse. What's your take on our society in this respect?
Well, it's funny. I had to do some work just this morning. I was giving a talk on for a group that is working with FASD, fetal alcohol syndrome. And their basic complaint was that these kids, first of all, are never calm, are very, very vulnerable to serious addictions. Okay. What we see in them is what we see in all kids. Everywhere a kid goes today, they are buffeted by what's called a hook model. And the hook model was based on research done by psychologists starting in the 70s on dopamine release. And what they found was they could manipulate dopamine release, receptors in a rat very easily. It's not hard at all to do. So dopamine's a real cool neurohormone, gives you a little buzz, gives you that, Jaak Panksepp, the great Jaak Panksepp, called it psychic energy. It gives you that feeling. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't interact with endorphins at all. It doesn't give you any pleasure. It just gives you that buzz. What the hook model is doing is basically giving the kid a shot of dopamine, and you can do it with however you're going to do it. You can do it with mimetic desire. You can do it with playing on the child's low self-esteem. You can do it with a bell, with whistles, with the color red. There are all kinds of techniques. And the kid gets a little shot of dopamine. And what's happening is we're seeing now this generation that when they get tired, they don't restore. They go for a shot of dopamine. And they'll get that dopamine. That dopamine craving can be satisfied any way. There's just endless ways that are, even potato chips are designed to maximize dopamine. Mm. So the kid is constantly, running on norepinephrine and epinephrine, never in that calm state which precedes and makes possible restoration. So the tank is empty, and it's not just the children.
And the great difficulty and juxtaposition of society, of the big wide world out there, is that a distressed person, a person who feels as though they're insufficient, unable, and so on and so forth, is then also a fairly easy person to manipulate or control. And
No, Richard, that's the key. And so what you do when you're doing the hook model, I was just talking about Eddie Bernays.
I was just thinking it. Yeah.
If you want to know what the greatest threat to the U.S. society is, it goes back to Eddie Bernays. And then these politicians have figured out how they can play the same games. So, I think about something like Bernays's Torches for Freedom March.
Yeah, turning women onto smoking. Yes.
Turning women, all in the name of freedom. But if they had known, if the women had at least known that American Tobacco Company was behind all this, at least they could have chosen. And but that's what we're seeing today. The manipulation is it's scary now because of what Matt said. Because what we're seeing now is kids that are not able to even have restorative sleep. We now know from some very interesting research done in Sweden, it takes about 6 hours for the amygdala. Once the amygdala has been triggered, it takes about 6 hours for it to calm down. So even if you've turned up the kid's lights, he's not having a restful sleep. He's not having restorative sleep. So it builds and builds. And then the kid starts to have stress behaviors, gets yelled at, gets punished. And now you've really exacerbated. And obviously COVID has made what was a bad situation, 1,000 times worse. It's pretty serious right now.
That's so interesting. And the release of dopamine too, that's lateralized between the hemispheres, where left hemisphere activity would be increased. And so you're diminishing right hemispheric activity. That's got to play into the whole scenario.
So Matt, that's a real interest. Okay, so that's a very important point. So what we're looking at is the mesolimbic pathway. And we now know that too much dopamine has really negative consequences in all sorts of ways, both mental, behavioral, et cetera. Now, let me tie it into something that Richard said right from the start. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Adele Diamond. She's a Canadian scientist at BC, and she's done some fascinating research showing that really there are different alleles for getting rid of dopamine. Some kids are born with a short allele, some kids are born with a long one. If you've got the wrong allele, you can't get rid of the excess dopamine. So some kids are flying through life because you're quite right what you just said, Matt. It goes right through the brain. There's four different dopamine pathways in the brain, you've got to clear it out. The ones getting in trouble are the ones who can't clear fast enough. And it's like flooding it's like flooding a car engine. And then all kinds of problems happen. But
sorry.
Go ahead, Richard.
No, I was just going to quickly say to anybody listening who are members, or please come and be members. But we've got a wonderful video I did on the dangers of dopamine, describing the four pathways and everything.
Oh,
that
that's
just
fabulous.
Alluded to there, so they can go and.
That's fabulous.
So please continue with what you're saying. The but.
But we can. So we have this method called Self-Reg. And so what we want to do is we want to spot the signs well in advance of, the kid going into fight or flight, the kid going into, or worse, going into freeze, whatever. And so I'll give you just one example. One of our big keys is instant gratification. So we hear all the time that this is a generation that is suffering from excessive instant gratification. But in fact, according to everything I've been saying here, we don't think that's quite accurate because instant gratification is supposed to be cognitive. It's supposed to be, I choose the short-term reward rather than the long-term reward. That's what the marshmallow task was all about. So we ran the marshmallow. I can talk about the marshmallow task without going into it, right, Richard?
Yeah. I think people have we've been talking about it for years.
Okay. So we kept on running the bloody marshmallow task, and here's what we found: the kids who can wait, they're really good at what we would call adaptive self-regulation. So they reappraise, they self-soothe, they do all the cognitive competencies. The kids who fail, they don't fail because they want the damn marshmallow. They fail because the marshmallow task is a stress test. It's been designed as a stress test. And you prime the kid with the stress. So, what the hell? Here's your reward. You can have 2 marshmallows. Kid doesn't give a shit. But the kids who fail eat the marshmallow as the only way they can think of to get rid of the stress. It's a maladaptive way of dealing with stress. So think about I'm reading this afternoon about this writer who was so stressed about Omicron that she deliberately gave herself the virus and then died.
Oh my God.
But that's the adult version of the marshmallow task. I can't handle the stress. I don't have adaptive ways of dealing with the stress. So they eat it. And that's what we find with all of the cases of instant gratification that we look at. What they all have in common. There's a wonderful study that Lisa Barrett did, the emotion lady, the neuroscience of emotions. She did a wonderful study showing that instant gratification goes up as stress goes up. It's a function of being overstressed. In fact, we use a matrix that Robert Thayer, the great American psychologist, designed called the Thayer matrix. And it's when the kid is in the bottom right quadrant of the Thayer matrix, which is low energy, high tension, excessive stress, that's when you get instant gratification. So what's happening is that these kids or whoever don't know how to deal with stress and succumb to whatever the hook model is trying to get, or whether it's a drink or drugs or whatever. So to help them, what we have to do is we have to go back to step one. Why are you so overstressed? What are the stresses in this kid's life? Are they physical? Are they emotional? Are they cognitive stresses? Are they social, or are they prosocial? And actually what we found is the kids that are overstressed, it's never one. It's always 5 domains. You always have to look at all the multiple stresses that they're under.
And this again is this complex system, the variety of emergence.
Exactly.
Just quickly for those who might not know the marshmallow test, Walter Mischel or Michel. It was in 1972 called the Stanford marshmallow test. Just look it up. It's fabulous material everywhere for you. But this whole idea, so beautifully put there, and just that really, it's almost like it rose for me, as you said, it rose out of the many possibilities, that this test was a stress test. And this idea, and we've been talking a lot about this. I've been writing a number of articles about the difference between stress and distress, because people say, stress is good for you. And you go,
that's good.
But it's and the simple thing I got to in defining it was saying that we have a rise in stress in relation to a demand. Cool. But if the demand is unresolvable, then of course you get to distress. But what you're saying beautifully, that the marshmallow experiment tells us, and then this terribly sad story of the COVID lady, is that the stress created by the demand itself becomes a stress, which is then unresolvable.
Exactly.
Right.
Can I add something to what you just said, Richard?
Oh, please. I'm just trying to figure out what you're saying as best I can.
Okay, so let me give you guys a suggestion for another guest to have on. Alan Fogel.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so Alan has just published a new book, and it's basically on restorative self-awareness. And he makes what I think is one of the most important points anyone's made. And that is, Selye has an argument that is exactly what Richard just explained. So what Selye ended up saying, especially in his autobiography, he says, you have to choose. You have to choose how you perceive a stress, whether you perceive it as positive or negative. Your choice determines whether it's going to be eustress or distress. What Fogel has shown is that the more stressed we become, the less aware we are that we are overstressed. It looks like it's a primitive survival function where self-awareness of being stressed is blunted because you want to keep going. And so there's literally a shift. It turns off, I'll just tell you quickly, it's the ventral medial and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. You need the ventral medial online to be aware that you're overstressed, to be aware that you're in pain or suffering. It turns off when you are under excessive stress. So here's a case yesterday where I was under incredible stress, physical stress, and totally oblivious of it. And I didn't realize at all that I was overstressed, so that I paid a huge price for it for the rest of the day. What we found over and over is you can say to people, well, when you're overstressed, you've got to, sit down, take a break. They don't know. You don't know you're overstressed. So what we have to do is we have to make, like, for example, part of my daily routine is I will meditate several times during the day, at times when I don't think I need to. And I'm always astonished when I do this to see how much tension I've been carrying around. That's what we have to do with kids. And it's real hard with teenagers because, of course, if I say this to them, then that's going to get a big no.
Yeah.
So I got a teenage son. I'm not just talking theory here. I live this every day.
Yeah. So this is kind of like a masking effect.
Exactly, Matt.
Yeah. So would this be sort of akin to the generic businessman that is, doing all the overtime and seemingly handling it all, and then all of a sudden he has a heart attack or a panic attack or something?
And the interesting thing, your example is perfect. And the interesting thing about it is that if you do therapy with him after this event, he will reveal, oh, well, there was this and that, and I just sort of thought it was nothing, and so we suppress these warning signs until you get a crisis. And I can tell you that this happened to me. So I know how easy this is to happen. Unfortunately, we have well, you guys have, you've got a big problem in your country because you've unleashed people that are sending everybody into red brain. Can I use the term red brain? It's kind of core idea of the theory. The red brain just means that the limbic system's taken over, and the prefrontal cortex of the blue brain is, just following behind. If it has a job, it's to rationalize or, exercise ego defenses.
Yeah, makes good sense.
So this is a real problem because an awful lot of the behaviors that I'm reading about do not strike me as intentional, do not strike me as volitional. These strike me as red brain behaviors that, certain people are exploiting for their own advantage. And it's really the same as what Richard was saying about the dangers of the hook model for kids. Only now we've got a whole society that's been, severely overstressed and behaving in ways that they are stress behaviors. Well, I'll just say that.
So how do we regain a sense of awareness that is typically masked then?
Yeah, because I'm just hearing that, because what I was just adding to that, some of these people who are stressed, and I've got a few friends of mine, and they've turned it into logic and good sense. The emergent thing is, but yeah, I can tell that they're stressed. So, going back to Matt's question.
Okay, so that goes all the way back to Wasted and Nisbet, right? Telling more than we can know. And so the blue brain's going to come up with the most logical, rational explanations for what was in fact a limbic impulse. Yeah. Because we want to see ourselves as rational. So what we do when we work with parents and teachers that are really stuck in self-control model, the kid needs to be whipped into shape and all that stuff. When a kid does something that you find annoying, irritating, whatever, stop and ask why, and then why now. What we're trying to do is insert a pause. One of the things that we have not talked about tonight is limbic resonance. And so that's one of the big breakthroughs. And, I talk in the book, the three big scientific breakthroughs that on which the book is grounded. The second one is limbic resonance. This idea that our limbic systems really do communicate with each other instantaneously. So if I'm talking to somebody who's hyper aroused, my limbic system goes hyper aroused instantly. And so then you've got a confrontation. So what we're trying to do is break that. We're trying to insert a pause. So we ask why. Why is he so opposed to vaccination, or why is he so whatever? And that's not to say that I know. It's to say that if we're going to talk about this, it's got to be our blue brains that are talking and not our red brains. But then what we want the individual to do is to ask themselves why. Why do I think this so strongly? Why do I dismiss any counter evidence? Why am I yelling? And the yelling, I'll just say one thing about that, okay, Richard? One of the things that we look at for distinguishing between, if you like, desire and compulsion. And this is what I'm describing here are compulsive behaviors. When it's limbic behavior, when it's dopamine driven, if you block dopamine, can I use the term seeking, pank-step seeking?
Yes, please.
Okay. When you block seeking, it causes anger or rage. It triggers, in pank-step's theory, the rage circuit. If it's just desire, if it's just a thought and you disagree, it doesn't cause rage, it causes an argument, but there's no sense of violence. There's no sense of, and so we want the individual to ask themselves, why am I so angry? Why am I so intolerant? And then we made a really key discovery. So we rolled this out all through Canada. It's right across the country in all the school boards. And we had as you can imagine, we had lots and lots of teachers who disagreed with my whole approach, who thought, no, that's the kids need a rod, right? Spare the rod, spoil the child, and all that. And what we found is we cannot convince them. We cannot persuade them. What we have to do is they have to come to us willingly. And so what would happen is we'd be working in a school and a bunch of teachers were there and their classrooms are quiet. The kids are doing great. And then this other teacher starts to look and say, oh, what's going on over there? And what we want them to see is, look, accept this, dismiss this, but maybe you are overstressed. Maybe you are doing what Matt said and you're masking it. Maybe you're going to feel a little bit better if you can do a stress inventory on yourself. So what we want to do is start that process. And that's what great psychotherapy does, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's so much in there that is just so fabulous. And just a couple of the quick things that come up in my mind is, this kid who says, you don't understand me.
Yeah.
Part of that story, remembering that everything is complex and there's lots of things, but I can see that part of that story is you don't know what I'm seeking. You don't understand what I'm seeking. And then I think you talk about education and you talk about things. One of my things I did in my master's in education was I did a research of successful teaching techniques in difficult situations. And one of the stories was the freedom writers, the Erin Gruen.
Oh.
And she found a common element by getting them to write their stories. And I was just thinking then, if I
that's great.
get into seeking, I would say that they were seeking to be seen and known. And so and if you block that,
I agree completely.
It's rage and rage and rage. And you just amplify that and you're shooting people in the street.
So that's beautifully put. And that's the essence of what we're trying to do here.
Right. All right. Wonderful. Have we missed something? And if not, what's just a rounding out of this process, as we move from this idea of what stress and seeking and all this stuff and how we generate all these problems without self-regulation?
I'll tell you a lovely little story. So we ran an RCT using these techniques on children with autism. And so part of the RCT was you have to have some psychometrician come in and assess IQ, because IQ has to be eliminated as a confab. So we picked our brightest little guy. He's 3 years old. And because we're trying to prime this psychometrician into thinking these are really bright kids. So we're all the scientists, we're crowded in the observation room, and she's in with the little guy. And it was a long test. It was a Bailey infant IQ test. Right. So they're just near the end, and the little guy says to her, I have to jump. And she gets pissed off because she's got a bunch of kids she's got to get through. She got to go through all the cohort. So her voice changes. She said, you're almost done. You can jump as much as you want in 5 minutes. And he says, no, I have to jump now. And he stands up and he starts to jump. So he's self-regulating. And then he sits down and finishes the rest of the test. So we're looking at each other and we think, oh my God, an IQ test is a stress test.
Yes.
And it is. And it is. And this is exactly what Aronson and Steele found with the stereotype threat.
Yes.
That if you call it
exactly.
just a questionnaire, you call it an IQ test, and it for some it becomes stress.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we retested them all. We got a special psychometrician in who worked with autistic kids, And we had a bunch of geniuses.
Yeah, and so true. It's all in the testing. I was writing just sort of amusingly with someone the other day talking about IQ tests, and I can remember when I was, I don't know, teenager or something, that came with an IQ test, and there was a thing saying, pick the object, the odd shape out.
Yeah.
And I explained how all of them could be the odd shaped out if you considered this. And that I wasn't considered clever to do that.
I would have given you a McCarthy Award.
yes. Yeah, damn, I had the wrong people assessing me.
Oh, beautiful.
Well, it's a little tough to keep up with you two. But I envy your listeners. This is something special.
Oh, it was so great to find out about you, Dr. Stuart Shanker. It's been a pleasure having you on the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. And we will point everyone to your book and other resources in the show notes.
Yes, and if you're watching on YouTube, because we'll have that up there, just look a little bit over the Stuart's shoulder and you will see this lovely book, Reframed, in the background there. So, but we'll also have those books in our show notes for everybody to click onto and go and purchase.
Fantastic. Dr. Shanker, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.